Good morning to all of those who are live streaming with us this morning. We are studying in the book of Jeremiah. We're going to be beginning with in the 44th chapter, beginning with the 8th verse. Jeremiah chapter 44, verse 8. We appreciate all of those who are tuned in by way of live streaming this morning. We're not having in-person worship here this morning. For those of you who aren't acquainted with Jeremiah in terms of our recent studies, those who haven't been studying with us, we certainly appreciate you joining us this morning. I think it would be good to just give you a kind of a gist of, if you're joining us for the first time, give you a gist of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was known by God when he was still in his mother's womb. That person, Jeremiah, still being in his mother's womb, God recognized him, and he was slated for some important task that God would give him later on. And when he was a relatively young man, Jeremiah really was reluctant to take on this mission of being God's servant, his oral servant, his prophet. He, I suppose, was a little young and timid at the time. He started his prophecy work during the kingship of Josiah, one of the good kings of Judah. In fact, he was the last good king of Judah, and so I suppose he had at least some support from the throne. But then, certainly because Manasseh had preceded Manasseh had preceded Josiah, the people were, just really steeped in idolatry. Really had been in an evil condition. The society was evil, and so even with having some support from the king, he was certainly not in a good position to receive a lot of accolades from what he was saying, from the audience. God, in Jeremiah, as his prophecy unfolds, the book unfolds, God repeatedly appealed to Judah to repent. Well, the Jews were, according to Jeremiah's language, they were a backsliding people. Sin had extracted a great price with regard to that social order. That social order was a decadent society. The people in Jerusalem were not in any sort of unity. There was all kinds of idolatry in the city and in the environment surrounding Jerusalem. The temple worship was kind of a joke in some respects, because these people probably came from worshiping idols to the temple just as something that they would routinely do. We learn from Jeremiah that God's righteous cause is going to prevail. Now, it's hard for us as humans to understand why God just didn't wipe out that society, except that we know that he kept that society, that Jewish lineage in place, so that he in fact would produce the Savior that had been promised through the millennia. So, looking now at the 44th chapter of Jeremiah, beginning with the 8th verse, in the beginning part of this chapter, in fact, I want to, just to be sure with everybody's on the same page here, I want to read the first 8 verses, even though we looked at those first 8 verses in some detail last week. But in chapter 44 of Jeremiah, the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the Jews which dwell in the land of Egypt, which dwell at Migdol and at Tahpanhes and Noph, and in the country of Pathros, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, You have seen all the evil that I have brought upon Jerusalem and upon the cities of Judah, and behold, this day they are a desolation, and no man dwelleth therein. Now, the setting here is that those few Jews that were left behind after the Babylonian captivity, under the leadership of a kind of an upstart leader, I suppose you'd say, they were forced, probably some of them forced, but some of them probably went willingly, into Egypt. Now, Jeremiah's advice and his prophecy, his preaching was from God, stay put in Judah. Absolutely don't go to Egypt. Well, the leadership, the self-appointed leadership of those few Jews, few compared to, the number of captives that were taken and then those who were killed in the battle of Jerusalem, they went on to they went on to Egypt anyway. Well, Jeremiah was caught up in that, I suppose. I don't know exactly why he didn't just stay put or appeal to some support from Babylon, because the Babylonian king was favorable to Jeremiah. But he, for whatever reason, and probably it was God's will, that he went on to Egypt with them. And so here in the 44th chapter, the first couple of verses, he's talking about he's saying to them, our home city, Jerusalem, the capital of Judaism, where the temple had been, that's in desolation. And in verse 3 it says, because of their wickedness, and this is why it was in desolation, because of their wickedness, which they have committed to provoke me to anger, God speaking here, in that they went to burn incense and to serve other gods, whom they knew not, neither they, ye, not your fathers, nor your fathers. So, not your fathers, the contemporaries, everybody seemed to be steeped in idolatry. Howbeit, verse 4, I sent unto you all my servants, the prophets, rising early, and sending them, saying, Oh, do not this abominable thing that I hate. But they hardened not, but they hearkened not, nor inclined their ear to turn from their wickedness, to burn no incense to other gods, or to burn no incense to other gods. In other words, they were not allowed to do that. Wherefore my fury, God speaking here, my fury and mine anger was poured forth, and was kindled in the cities of Judah, and in the streets of Jerusalem, and they are wasted and desolate, or laying in ruins, as at this day, at this time. Verse 7, Therefore now thus saith the Lord, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, wherefore commit ye this great evil against your souls? Notice the language there, against your souls. To cut off from you man and woman, child and suckling out of Judah, to leave you none to remain. So the whole social order of Jerusalem, that whole that whole society, the body politic, everything was destroyed there. And of course, that didn't seem to affect these people that took off and went to Egypt against the will of God. Now in verse 8 then, where we left off last week, in that ye provoked me into wrath with the works of your hands, burning incense unto other gods in the land of Egypt. And here, apparently they had started up their worship, got to Egypt, I don't know what kind of a reception they got when they got to Egypt from the Egyptians, but they started up their idolatry again. In the middle of verse 8, that ye might cut yourselves off, and that ye might be a curse and a reproach among the nations of the earth. Israel, Judah, was supposed to set an example for the world, for the nations. But they really didn't set a good example. They set a bad example. Now, there was one time when the Society of Jews did, in fact, send a good message to the other nations. As we know, during the period of time that Solomon reigned, things were so good, the message coming out of Jerusalem was so great that the Queen of Sheba came to investigate, to see, how did they produce such a great society? Well, but at this time, later on, the kingdom divided. The northern tribes were evil. Their kings were totally evil, every one of them, and many of the kings of Judah, the southern tribe, two tribes were in fact, some of them were evil. But verse 9, he continues to, and you can imagine, here's Jeremiah with a crowd of people there, talking to them, and he's saying, they're in Egypt, have you forgotten the wickedness of your fathers, and the wickedness of the kings of Judah, and the wickedness of their wives? In these ensuing verses, it mentions the wives and women 3 or 4 times, so apparently the women were as bad as the men. In many societies, women are more attuned to things of righteousness than the men, but in this case, the women there, and the wickedness of their wives, and your own wickedness, and the wickedness of your wives, which they have committed in the land of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. Now, some of these people, of course, were, they had been in Jerusalem before the Babylonian assault, and now they're in Egypt, contrary to the will of God, and now these men and women equally are evil. And then verse 10, they are not humbled even to this day. Even after the destruction of the temple, after the destruction of Jerusalem, after all of the harm that had been caused by their evil conduct, these people ended up not learning a lesson. We talk about learning from history. Well, they didn't learn from history. They're not humbled, even unto this day, neither have they feared, nor walked in my law. God is saying this. Nor in my statutes that I set before you and before your fathers. Therefore, now, here's the result. Here's the effect, the cause. The evil was the cause. Now, what's the effect? Therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will set my face against you for evil, and to cut off all Judah. Now, you escaped into Egypt. You're not going to get away from God. You're going to be cut off. The Jews that went to Egypt, they're going to be cut off. And I will take the remnant of Judah. Typically, when you talk about the remnant, we think of the people that came back from Babylonian captivity, and they were, the remnant, those that were set apart from the ones that stayed back in Babylon. But in this case, I will take the remnant of Judah, that is, those that had gone into Egypt. I'll take the remnant of Judah that have set their faces to go into the land of Egypt, to sojourn there, and they shall all be consumed. Now, that wasn't a very good message. I think if I'd have been in that audience, I might have wanted to, figure out how I need to get out of this. I need to get out of this condition, this environment. But apparently, a large percentage of them, overwhelming majority of them, must have stayed there. And in the middle of verse 12, and they shall even be consumed by the sword. Remember that trifecta: sword, pestilence, famine. Well, here it is: by the sword and by famine. And they shall die from the least unto the greatest by the sword. You see the three plagues that God brought on these people. And they shall be an execration and an astonishment and a curse and a reproach. Now that execration, that just is a word that means that it would be a laughing stock. They would be a curse. They would be looked down upon by others. In verse 13, I will punish them that dwell in the land of Egypt, as I have punished Jerusalem. Same thing's going to happen down here that happened in Jerusalem. You escaped that first assault from the Babylonians, but as we learned from Ezekiel last week in the 29th, in Ezekiel 29, 30, 31, and 32, Ezekiel prophesied about Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, destroying Egypt. And that was at the same time period here, by the sword, by famine, and by the pestilence, so that none of the remnant of Judah, in verse 14, are gone into the land of Egypt to sojourn there, shall escape or remain, that they should return into the land of Judah, to the which they have a desire to return to dwell there. For none shall return, but such as shall escape. Now, you're not going to, maybe some of them, this implies that maybe some of them will escape, maybe ahead of time. But the bottom line here is that at the period of time you might want to get out, you're not going to escape. The Babylonian assault is going to work its damage against the Egyptians, as well as the people of Jerusalem, or the Jews, the people of Judah. Then, in verse 15, then all the men which knew that their wives had burned incense unto other gods, and all the women that stood by, a great multitude. Now there must have been quite a few Jews in this assemblage. Now it may have been that some of those Jews had already escaped into Egypt. People migrate from one country to the other, especially in that time on that timeline. Might have been some of the Jews there that they sought out, that already were in Egypt, and so there's must have been quite a few. Let me read that in verse 15 again. Then all the men which knew that their wives had burned incense into the gods. This was a family affair. This idolatry was, it was the man and wife. It was children. Everybody was engaged in this. And all the women that stood by, a great multitude, even all the people that dwell in the land of Egypt, and in Pathros, that's an area of Egypt, answered Jeremiah, saying, well, here's the response the preacher got. Now you can imagine, here's a person standing up to preach, and essentially every one of the people to whom he's preaching is against what you said. Now that wouldn't be a very comfortable environment for a preacher or anybody. And the whole audience was against what he was saying. Verse 16 again, as for the word that thou, here's what they're saying, that thou spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will not hearken unto thee. Wow, that would be you can imagine, this Jeremiah was one of the most maligned, assaulted prophets of all of God's history with mankind. Well, he was assaulted in Jerusalem before the Babylonian captivity. He got caught up in this movement, or this this movement to Egypt, this parade to Egypt, and now they're opposing him again. Verse 17. But we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her. Now, this Queen of Heaven was, I don't know, it was, there were many sky gods, so to speak. There were many gods that related to the heavens. But this Queen of Heaven must have been some special goddess. According to what we know about history and so on, this Queen of Heaven was a god of fertility, they thought. Now, it's amazing to me that this idea of creating God, whether it be a wooden idol or a metal idol, or some of the celestial, bodies in the sky, in the universe, it just seems to me that it's strange that mankind would, organize, institutionalize such worship kind of activity. It just seems strange to me that would happen. But this Queen of Heaven, according to what commentators and according to history, and according to archaeological finds, was represented in a statue of a naked woman, and as it was true of many of these idolatrous worship ceremonies, there was a prostitution cult inherent in that religious practice. And maybe that's what appealed to some of those people, because they combined just idolatry with lasciviousness and that sort of thing. Maybe that was an appeal. Now, there were several societies. The Canaanites. There were, even in Babylon, there were those who practiced this worship of the Queen of Heaven or any of these other celestial bodies. I was interested in, and I don't know. I don't know if this has any connection. But last week in one of the papers, there's a picture of people praying to the sun god. Whether and this happened to be a picture from India, but these folks were praying to the sun god. Now, I don't know whether there's any connection between this sun god that's contemporarily worshipped some places on earth and some of these practices back in this area of this era of the Old Testament. I don't know, but it was just interesting to me that here these folks here in some place in India are worshiping the sun god. Well, these Jews were worshiping the Queen of Heaven, and they were proud of it. Let's read that 17 again. But we will, verse 17 again. But we will certainly do whatsoever things goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers and our kings. Now this wasn't new. This wasn't new. This is something that some of them been doing all along. Our fathers, our kings, and our princes in the cities of Jerusalem and in the cities of Judah, that is, those encampments around Jerusalem, and in the streets of Jerusalem, for then we had plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. Now that was a dumb statement, we might say. They were worshiping this Queen of Heaven, and they were saying, we had prosperity. Duh. I mean, Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. So where was the Queen of Heaven? There. I mean, how stupid could they be to say that while we were worshiping the Queen of Heaven, the sun god or one of those other, kinds of idolatrous beings, or I guess you couldn't say beings because they weren't beings, but for them to conjure up in their minds, when we were worshiping that Queen of Heaven, we were living the good life. But when we stopped, verse 18, but when we left off, when we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we had wanted all things. We had one, in other words, it had, when we stopped doing that, we have wanted all things. In other words, we don't have anything now, and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine. So they blamed their destruction on not worshiping the Queen of Heaven. Now that's how ignorant could they have been. Verse 19 again, and when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven, poured out drink offerings unto her, and did make her cakes. They must have baked up some sort of something. Poured out drink offerings unto her without her men. Now that idea without her husband kind of has the implication the husbands were in full agreement with these women baking bread and baking these cakes and offering them to the Queen of Heaven. Then verse 20, and then Jeremiah said unto all the people. Jeremiah, poor guy, he's going to respond to this situation. Then Jeremiah said, and what would you say? What would the preacher say? What would the prophet say? I mean, after listening to all that, I can imagine he was dumbfounded at their response. I suppose he had to take some deep breath and collect his composure. And in verse 20, then Jeremiah said unto the people, and to the men, and to the women. Now, for whatever reason, he's targeting both. This is not just the men. It's had to do with both genders. And to all the people which had given him that answer, saying, the incense that ye burned in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, Ye and your fathers and your kings and your princes and the people of the land, did not the Lord remember them? And came it not unto his mind? He's saying, God remembers what you did. So that the Lord could no longer bear because of the evil of your doings. Now that idea, the Lord could no longer bear, something about the nature of God that they had reached the point where God could not, by his nature, allow it to continue. It was at some point there that God authorized the Babylonians to destroy them. Now, prior to that, the 10 tribes had been destroyed by the Assyrian assault and captivity. And then the Babylonians destroyed the people of Judah. And God, God orchestrated all of this. According to Ezekiel, when we learned last week, Ezekiel said that essentially that God was preparing Nebuchadnezzar to destroy Egypt. You see, God was in control of all that. The Assyrians, God used the Babylonians to destroy the Assyrians. Then he used the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, to destroy Babylon. And he used Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon to destroy the Egyptians. Now, during the years, and when we studied Isaiah and parts of Jeremiah, we see this happening where the Jewish kings were periodically trying to make political or let's say strategic battle plans with the Egyptians. And God had said, the prophets had said, that you ought not be sending envoys to Egypt. You ought not be looking to Egypt to protect you. And so, this was something they were just doing over and over again. There, let me read verse 22 again. So that the Lord could no longer bear because of the evil of your doings, because of the abominations which ye have committed. Therefore is your land a desolation and an astonishment and a curse without inhabitant as this day. Because ye have burned incense, and because ye have sinned against the Lord, and have not obeyed the voice of the Lord, nor walked in his way, nor in his statutes, nor in his testimonies, therefore this evil has happened unto you, as at this day. Jeremiah sets the record straight. Queen of Heaven had nothing to do with this. God decreed that you would be destroyed because of your abominations. Now, do you suppose he convinced anybody? Well, we don't know. There might have been some there that listened to this and said, aha, we better get out of here. I don't know that happened, but there might have been some that's paid attention to Jeremiah. Moreover, in verse 24, Jeremiah said unto all the people and to all the women, again here, coming back to the women, why Jeremiah focused on, men and women. Gender had nothing to do with the abominations here. They were both guilty. Moreover, Jeremiah said unto all the people and to all the women, hear the word of the Lord, all Judah that are in the land of Egypt. Now I'm talking directly to you Jews that came from Judah to reside in the land of Egypt. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, ye and your wives, again, wives, both of you, both genders, ye and your wives have both spoken with your mouths and fulfilled with your hand, saying, we will surely perform our vows that we have vowed, to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her. Ye will surely accomplish your vows, and surely perform your vows. He's saying here, okay, you've been warned. You're not going to change, but there are going to be consequences. And he'll start enunciating the consequences. Let's look at that again. We will. Jeremiah is saying, we will surely. He's saying what they were thinking, the people. We will surely perform our vows that we have vowed, to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out our drink offerings unto her. Ye shall surely accomplish your vows, and surely perform your vows. At this point, I think he's just saying, go ahead. Go ahead and do it. I've warned you, but go ahead. Therefore, now, what's going to happen? What are the consequences? The cause and effect here. What's going to happen? What's the effect? What are the consequences? Therefore, you're going to do this. Therefore, hear ye the word of the Lord, all Judah that dwelleth in the land of Egypt. Behold, I have sworn by my great name. He's sworn by his great name. What's that mean? He has vowed. He has determined. And of course, since he's determined, it's going to happen. There's no doubt about it. It's going to happen. Behold, I have sworn by my great name, saith the Lord, and that my name shall be no more named in the mouth of any man of Judah. I don't know whether he's meaning here he's going to cut off prophecy. Now, this is the last record. These verses here, from 26 to the end of the chapter, these verses are the last record of Jeremiah prophesying. So it may be that God is saying, you're not going to hear from me anymore. I'm done with you. Now that may be what he was saying here. I'm done with you. And even if that isn't the case, even if God wasn't done with them, they were so far gone in their idolatry that there was no chance of recovery from it. No turning back. You see. I mean, there was no. They were just so determined to be idolaters that there was no way for them to, change their mind. Well, that my name shall no more be named in the mouth of any man of Judah, in all the land of Egypt, saying, the Lord God liveth. And so they won't even be talking about the Lord God. Behold, now here's more consequences. Behold, I will watch over them. Notice what he's saying. I will watch over them for evil and not for good. What's he saying? He's saying, I'm going to cause evil. Remember, Ezekiel said in chapters 29 through 32, Nebuchadnezzar is going to be coming from Babylon. Behold, I will watch over them for evil, not for good. And all the men of Judah that are in the land of Egypt shall be consumed by the sword and by the famine, and there shall be an end of them. The country of Egypt is going to be destroyed. Their people are going to be captured, killed. Their institutions are going to be interrupted. And the Jews are going to suffer the same fate as the Egyptians. Because the Nebuchadnezzar's fight was with the Egyptians, right? And the Jews were involved in the Egyptian environment. Yet, a small number that escaped the sword shall return out of the land of Egypt into the land of Judah. Now, isn't that something? Jeremiah is saying, essentially you're all going to be destroyed. But there is a remnant even there. I don't know whether the remnant is 2 people or 200 people or 50 people, but there's going to be some that will get out of that mess. 28 again, verse 28, yet a small number that escaped the sword. During this skirmish, battle, small number is going to escape the sword, and all the remnant of Judah that are gone into the land of Egypt to sojourn there shall know whose words shall stand, mine or theirs. Those people, can you imagine when Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, comes calling on Egypt, those Jews are going to say, uh-oh, Jeremiah's right. Jeremiah was right. We should have listened to Jeremiah. And verse 29, and this shall be a sign unto you, saith the Lord, that I will punish you in this place. Too late, but they're going to be punished. That ye may know that my words shall surely stand against you for evil. Thus saith the Lord in verse 30, behold, I give Pharaoh Hophra, king of Egypt, into the hand of his enemies, and into the hand of them that seek his life. Now, I'm going to give, as Ezekiel said, into the hand. Here we have to assume primarily in the hand of the Babylonians, because that's what he did to Zedekiah. He gave Zedekiah, the king of Judah, under the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, his enemy that sought his life. Well, then will they know that the Lord's word through Jeremiah was exactly what they should have been paying attention to. That brings us to chapter 45. And I think we can take a break here, have time to prepare for worship. And so next week we will begin with chapter 45 of Jeremiah. Now, chapter 45 is an interesting, and you might want to look at it during the interim, an interesting message to Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah, his companion that took his, did his writing. He was we might say, a scribe or a stenographer. And there's chapter 45 is just a short message there that talks about a message that God had given to Baruch. Then next week we'll get in also to chapter 46, and from chapter 46 for the next several chapters, Jeremiah turns his attention to the other nations. Doesn't say much about Judah, if anything. He's going to be talking about what's going to happen to other nations. How do you know what was going to happen? Obviously, God revealed it, and the sovereign God was in charge of the nations. So that's will be a very interesting study. So let's stop there and take a pause for worship to begin in just a few minutes. Thank you.